Welcome to the Wolff Den, presented by Win Again Academy. I am Matt Wolff, founder and CEO of Ticket Time Machine. Today we have Steve Chilton in the program, in the Wolff Den, on the program, on the show. Welcome. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, excited to talk. I love talking about music and festivals and events and small business and all of that good stuff. So for the people who don't know who you are, give us a quick intro and then let's get into it.
Yeah, Steve Chilton. I a concert promoter in Arizona. I promote shows under the guise Psyko Steve Presents. I own a 300 cap music venue called the Rebel Lounge that we've now been open 7 years. And then we just launched, coming up here in December, music festival called Zona Music Festival. That's a first year coming up in December with Beach House, Portugal the Man, Bleachers, Tegan and Sarah, Japanese Breakfast, a whole bunch of more bands. And then in addition to that, I'm a founding board member at NIVA, the National Independent Venue Association. We were the group that lobbied for the Save Our Stages Act in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah, NIVA, great organization. We're going to touch on that a little bit. You have, well, let's start with the festival here. It's a first year festival, and in Arizona, there's some festivals that are announcing here, and you got the Super Bowl coming up. How does that figure into your planning to start a first time festival there?
Or maybe Super Bowl, not so much. I mean, we're actually the main Super Bowl host committee is hosting some of their big events in the same city park that we're doing our festival. We're leading before they are. We're in December and they're in February, so we don't really get to see or learn from them, but they're going to come out and see from us. Yeah, and there's a lot of festivals in Arizona, but just kind of, you know, I didn't feel there was any that fit quite this niche or the artists we work with. So there are some really good festivals, but it just felt like the right time to do our own.
How long did you have in mind to do it? And so how long does it take between, because you're a promoter, you promote a ton of events, 400 events over the course of a year. Obviously, those are smaller events. This is the first big festival, multi-day. When did this come to your mind? When did you say, that's it, I'm doing it? And then how long does it take the first time to kind of make it happen?
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time. You know, being a promoter, been thinking about it for a long time. So in the back of the head, or sort of thinking about future, it's been a long time. We kind of started working on this in early 2020, right before COVID, but barely. I mean, we were just barely on the research and notes sort of phase of it. And then I do another small festival called 8123 Fest, which I produced for the band called The Main. It is their artist curated branded festival. And so I've done 3 of those for them. We skip every other year. So we did it earlier this January. And so kind of as soon as that finished, and that's their vision, it's their festival, you know, I produce it for them, but they deserve most of the credit for all the creative parts and branding on it. But so as soon as that festival finished in January, it was kind of like, okay, now it's time to start on using that as kind of a model to start working on this. So we really started in February. The real, you know, the real work started in February this year. It's been pretty much since.
It's interesting. You think about how long does it take to sort of research and figure it out and put it together for the first time. But then if you're doing it every year, you're almost like planning for the next one before the first one comes up. Now you have a lot of this stuff in place with learning. So it's like that learning curve becomes so much smaller, right? If you're doing an annual, people want an annual event, unless you've told them, hey, we're only going to do this every other year. You know, you have an Olympics or World Cup, but we know it's coming every 4 years. People are disappointed that that there's not going to be one the following year. There's a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, and that's definitely what the goal with this is, to be the first year of something that becomes an annual event. So we're spending a lot more time on some things that we might not, if we weren't planning to do it as long term. But yeah, you're totally right. Just figuring out, how many tents you need. I mean, there's so many pieces of muscle memory that once you've been doing it a few years, every time we do something bigger, the next thing becomes easier. So there's a lot of, early on when we first started working on it, that was one of the problems is we didn't really have a lot of answers. We had this vague idea of vaguely what we wanted to do with the festival, but it's kind of a lot of early on chicken and egg problems of, well, we don't know what we're doing over here, which makes it harder to do this other thing over there. And, some of the first artist conversations were hard because we just didn't really have a lot of answers. We really hadn't flushed out the budget. We hadn't flushed out ticket prices. We hadn't flushed out, staging, so a lot of the first questions to come back, which were totally fair questions, we didn't have a lot of answers for. So it kind of took a while to work through some of the things of just getting, the diligence. But then once you're doing already thinking for, for a year or two, those answers will have much better sight. We'll have, here's photos from the event, here's numbers that we did, here's, much more of a thought out game plan. So hopefully that's the goal, that it gets easier.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to do 2 days. You're already set up for 2 days, right? One day,
Yeah.
2 day. But if it's a first time, was there any thought to just saying, hey, let's try this one day, see if we can, see what it looks like?
Well, that's kind of what we did with 8123 Fest, was a one day, a much smaller event than this, but was one day. And when we first started working on it, I was envisioning a much smaller event than we ended up building. But there was a lot of interest, and it kind of seemed easier to go bigger than stay smaller. So yeah, there was some thought of that, but it just seemed, so much of the hard part, you're doubling it. A lot of the hard part is the same for one day versus 2 days. The staffing is very similar. Obviously, people work a few more shifts or hours, but getting the number of people working on it, the marketing's the same. The booking process is very similar, So a lot of the harder pieces doing the 2 days is, no additional work. The permitting process is the exact same. A lot of those big picture pieces are the same, whether it's one day or two.
Yeah, I got to imagine the lineup also is probably the most difficult, not only because you have to try and figure out the planning and the scheduling of whoever you might want, but the cost of it. How much, like we have a budget, how much are we going to have? And we have this, the levels of acts that are there. You guys have some very well known acts coming to the show. Some that are, some of these acts are just like really, they're known for doing the music festival world, right? Like Japanese Breakfast is all over the festival scene. I think they're coming. I think they're down here for Audis. I think it's called Audis Music Fest now. How do you choose that? Give us a little bit of insight into how do you choose it, and then also the fan response when you do the lines. Never good enough, But then everybody wants that when we were young type of lineup. When you're just like, I don't even know how that's possible. You just think like, how can they even get all of those bands to play in this festival?
Yeah, you got a lot of early on when booking it. It's a lot of chicken and egg. Kind of everyone's like, "Well, who do you got?" And I'm like, "Well, you're the first person I've asked, so I don't have anybody." Or so some of those first conversations were just everyone wants to know who else, everyone else is on it. And so, but for the most part, that was what was really fun and inspiring for me to work on this, where it really is, all my vision. And Jeff, my general manager slash other talent buyer, me and him worked on it from the beginning. But we didn't send out for submissions. We didn't ask it for anyone's ideas. We just sort of came up with the list we wanted and started working down it. And I think out of the first 20 offers we sent, we confirmed 17 or 18 of them eventually, with the normal negotiation back and forth. But a lot of it, most of the artists on this are artists that we've worked with for a long time. So it really, internally feels pretty good, because a lot of these acts, everyone's like, oh, TV Girl's on this. It's like, yeah, we've been booking them for years. A lot of the Arizona, we put a lot of Arizona acts on it, which I think distinguishes it from some other Arizona festivals. And, a lot of those are artists we've worked with for a long time. And so a lot of the conversations was what made the conversations easy, because a lot of the people just trusted us on it. A lot of people wanted to be involved immediately. Some obviously had to do a lot of the diligence, especially at the top, but a lot of the conversations were pretty easy, of people pretty trusting, because some of these bands we have 15-year plus track record with. When we said we're doing the next big, our next thing, and people wanted to support.
Well, explain this a little bit to people. Why does a band care who else is on? I want to play there. I'm a headliner. I'm not a headliner. Why do they care who else is on there from a fan's perspective? Who wants to
I think they want to, they want to see that it's going to be a good festival. They're locking up the market for a play. They can't play, if the obvious radiuses of, some of the artists turned down their fall tour, didn't do Phoenix on a fall tour so they could do this festival. So, they just want to make sure that it's a quality festival, or know where they're fitting in it. So, I mean, I'm not begrudging, a lot of artists have to do the due diligence, and I totally respect that. I'm not complaining about it, but for a first year, it was just a little hard because, there's nothing to look back on. For year two, we'll say, this was the first year, this is what we're trying to do again. Everyone will be like, oh, I wish I was part of that. I'll do the next year.
Yeah.
People know what it means to be on Coachella or something, or Lolla. Like, what a punk rock bowling or a Riot Fest, what the brand is, what the vibe is, but when you're a first year festival, it's like, well, what direction are you going in? Are we going to be the oddball? Are we going to fit? Does this make more sense than just doing our own show? So it makes sense that people are pretty, plus I think there's a large track record of festivals, knock on wood, not doing well, in first years. So they want to see that, is this a quality event?
Yeah. I think
You know,
it's interesting because there's people like they want to see their band. If we talk about the festival poster, the lineup, they want to see them higher up and in bigger. So for some people, it might be like, hey, if we're normally higher than we might normally be, because it's not as that might be better for them. They might be looking for that too, right?
Yeah, and I mean, for Beach House, their whole vibe and ambience, they won't play during the day, and so there's a lot of bigger festivals where they won't play unless it's late at night. Now, they're our headliner on Saturday night, so they're going, the prime time at night, so for them, they would rather, just because the ambiance and vibe of their production is such a part of it, they would rather do a smaller festival where they can headline than necessarily a bigger festival where they're at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and the vibe isn't right. So you get a lot of concerns from artists of what they're looking for.
How late can you add? Or obviously there's stuff out of your control, but how late do you say, hey, this is our lineup and we got to go with it?
Uh, yeah, I mean, at some point you just have to announce the thing. So, I mean, we were definitely scrambling to try and finish a few um, artists, and we originally had planned to announce earlier in the summer. My goal was to announce by June or 4th of July. It was kind of my drop dead, and we just weren't there, and we weren't coming up on it, and so we decided to wait till fall and announce when school got back in, when the universities got back in. And it ended up being really great because we got to wait for a few artists. If we had decided we're going with what we've got, or moved on from a few conversations, that was a conscious choice of, well, let's give these conversations feel good. We're just not at the finish line. Let's give them a little bit more breathing room to get the lineup where we want it. And I think it turned out a better lineup for it because we didn't constrain ourselves there. Would it be nice to announce a little earlier, but also middle of summer is a weird time to announce a December event. So
Yeah.
it worked out, but yeah, no, it was sometimes you got to set deadlines. We're announcing by this date and we have to be ready by that date. So
Well, I think that's a good transition to talk about independent promoters, independent festivals, the type of flexibility that you might have and the leeway in being independent and small and as opposed to being owned by, these big, the bigger companies that run it. And that's what you guys do. You're an independent promoter for these festivals. You're part of NIVA. What are some other advantages to being small and independent as opposed to, again?
There's on both sides. Like one, I got to do what I want on this. This festival, top to bottom, is my vision. There's no one telling me what we can or can't do, or an artist we can or can't work with, or any of that. So the one is the freedom to do what I want. The branding, the naming, the art, all of that. I don't have to clear any of that by anybody. So some of that's fun. Not that we're doing anything that's weird or would be hard to be approved, but less of that. On the inverse, it's the support. It's if you're with those larger companies, you've got lots of years of experience on doing these events where, different divisions, where if you're working on something with Live Nation, you can just call C3 and say, I need some advice on this. Help me budget this. And so it's that internal support that you lose. Just we're making we're making some small mistakes here and there because some things are taking longer than they might because we just don't have the institutional knowledge. So that would be the advantage of the big guys, is just the knowledge that the knowledge that they have. The more of these events you do, the easier they are to do.
Yeah, you've done a ton of events every year. How did you get into the event world and to promote? And what was music? What was music to you growing up?
Well, the first events I ever was involved in, I produced. And so I started putting on shows in high school, was putting on little DIY shows with my friends' bands and at DIY art galleries and punk rock basements and things like that, and was just booking my friends' bands. And it started as, just something fun to do in high school. And then through college did that and did some different street teams here and there and worked for some different promoters, doing every little random odd job as a flyer guy for a venue, and then, working box office for people or runner or different things. And so I was doing different jobs in music while doing my own shows. So even though I'd work with other promoters, I'd promote my own shows on the side. And at first it was very much a hobby or something I did for fun in college, but then it just, 22 years later, still doing it and just snowballed bigger and bigger.
And now becomes your your company. You start Psyko Steve. Why Psyko Steve?
And that is a dumb joke in high school. And I don't know how I don't even really know how it came about. But when I started doing some shows, some of my friends whose bands were some of the high school bands I was booking were jokingly like, you should put Psyko Steve Presents on the flyer. And then so just to mess with them, I did. And 22 years later, I've got to explaining it and don't have a better story than that. It was an inside joke, and or just grew and became a thing.
Spelled well. Why spelled that way though?
Just a terrible speller and typos. So literally would not have done it that way if I had been thinking about it in this was the early days of the internet and marketing online. They didn't have a website to start. I mean, most venues at that time didn't have websites, or at least good ones. So wasn't thinking about it.
I think those are some of the best. That's a great story. Sounds like you're like, I don't have a great story. I'm like, no, that's a pretty good story if we're trying to figure out, because naming and branding it's really
so
tough
hard
to do, especially when you don't have a, like for Ticket Time Machine, you can involve Ticket, even Zona Music Festival, you can put music festival in there. It almost doesn't matter what the first part is. So you can kind of, but with just a company, it's hard to come up with something. You can think of 100 of them. That's why they kind of like jokingly send it out to people to name, but they're like, look, let's hear what you guys have to say. What do you think it should be a good name for our new sports team or new, festival or new, whatever it is. It's not the easiest thing to do.
We actually did a contest on this festival that we're need to wrap up today, but it was the Name Our Stages contest. So we asked people to submit their names for the 4 stages at our festival, and we got 1,200 result or submissions. So it's just a ton to go through.
That's the good
And
and
the
bad,
problem is
right?
there's a ton of good ones and not a lot of like amazing ones. Like there's just all of them are like, yeah, that's good. That works. That's good. That works. But like, going through all 1,200 responses, trying to find how we're going to name our stages.
Yeah, but you also don't want to miss out on the one that was it.
Yeah,
So it's like,
exactly. So,
why Zona Music Festival? Obviously, it's in Arizona, no brainer.
uh,
Why not
yeah,
something else? Why not?
uh, just honestly, it was kind of a placeholder name that ended up sticking. It was like, well, that works. We'll start, we'll come up with something better. And then didn't. It just kind of got a lot of confirmation bias where we just started calling it Zona, and then it just kind of stuck. I like that it was a short, simple word that doesn't really mean anything. It's not really a word. It's just it's not an abbreviation anyone in Arizona would use for Arizona. Clearly, it's a play on the name Arizona, but it's not, that's not like a slang people would use around here. So just
I
kind
use Zona I'll tell you, when I'm putting Arizona, University of Arizona, which is in Phoenix, it's in Tucson, in on my March Madness, I put Zona just to,
yeah, occasionally does, but it's not like what every local calls it or
no.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's look, it works. And also it's the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah.
Easy to explain.
And it was one where, a lot of the identity of this festival we're trying to build is more connected to local. We have a lot of Arizona artists on it. We're doing a lot of different things with some local artists, you know, graphic designers and art, painter artists with this, as well as just the musicians. So, wanted something to feel very Arizona, feel very unique, in a way that some of those, like Coachella or Austin City Limits, the location is kind of part of the name and the brand, and kind of wanted something that had that vibe, something that also didn't really mean anything, so it could mean anything, so it's like, let's, it doesn't have a lot of connotation for people, so um, wanted something that could evolve and change over time, or be pretty fluid with the artists on it. If you say Zona Music Festival without thinking about the lineup, you don't really, you're like, oh, what is it, or what kind of, you don't have like a pre-notion of what the festival is going to be.
Yeah.
uh,
And what is it? Because it's like pop towards punk.
yeah,
There's a little,
yeah, just indie rock in general, I guess. There's a little bit of punk rock, a little bit of dancey stuff, a little bit of folky stuff. The one big trend I think is a lot of it, it's a very cutting edge festival, very, a lot of new artists. Big part of what we do is artist development. So I think one of the things on this festival is just a really good mid card on the festival. I think that every festival kind of has the same a lot of the same headliners. Like the artists we have headline a lot of festivals and play all the major festivals. Like you can definitely go see these artists at other festivals, but I think the mid tier with the Regrets and the Garden and Waxahachie, and there's a lot of good stuff in the middle that um, is just really great artists that are buzzing up and coming up. So a lot of time spent on who are the artists that we really believe in.
yeah. And some of these artists are actually performing at the I Voted Music Festival. I remember hearing some of them last time. I think Phantom Planet had played there. Arizona's an area that they focus on. So it's good to
Yeah.
hear. Like, I had never heard of them before, and now they're in my phone when I'm doing my exercise and listening to. So I think there's a lot of good music, and when you see the type of music on a festival, you kind of just trust that there's going to be a handful of bands that you never heard of that you're going to like. You like, I think these guys know what they're doing, and I'm going to enjoy that. I'll be honest, I'm a headliner guy, so but I go to the whole festival. I'll go there when it starts, and I'll listen, to all the bands there, and find some that I really like.
And that's I think the best part about music festivals is the discovery. It's seeing something you wouldn't necessarily see, or being, oh, I've heard of these guys, but I've never really checked it out. But I'm gonna go watch it because I'm here, Whereas you might not have gone to buy a ticket to see them on a Tuesday night in a club, but you want to check it out. Actually, this year at South by Southwest had so much more fun not trying to see anything and just walking into shows and just making no effort to catch anything, and ended up seeing a lot of great stuff. And went to meet up with a friend. He was at Stubbs. And I get in there and I'm like, oh, who's this playing right now? And he's like, oh, it's this band Pom Pom Squad. And I was like, oh, great, we have them booked next week in Phoenix. I hadn't seen them yet, and now we have them on our festival. And I didn't know and I walked in on them twice at South by without intending. Went to the Brooklyn Bowl party, and they were walked in and they were on stage again. I'm like, oh, it's them again. And it was great. It was just felt way more. I just went with the flow, went to meet up with who I wanted to, went to some of the showcases without stressing the times, and had way more fun discovering just walking in on something, and just checking it out blind was so much more fun.
Yeah, the FOMO in me would not do well with that, but because it's weird, like the festivals, when you have good, big festivals, and they're good acts on both. I wouldn't say good, like bigger acts on both stages. You got to go back and forth. I find myself going to setlist.com and being like, all right, well, are they probably going to sing this song at the beginning, the middle? When should I start to leave? And I'm just, even at bands I
close with it.
That's why I went. I don't want to miss out.
Yeah, and I can totally get that. And for a lot of people, I mean, I see so much music and, see everybody. I was at When We Were Young in Vegas last weekend, and joking, there's definitely more bands on that festival I've seen 10 times than there are bands I've seen less than 10 times, and so I kind of don't mind when festivals have acts at the same time, because then I go, oh, wait, I'm going to go watch half an hour of this band and then half an hour of this band.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And sort of split it, when they're playing decently long sets, you're like, oh, I can go watch, and for me, on a lot of times, that's all I want to, sometimes all I want to see on some acts, where it's like, yeah, I want to go check them out. I want to watch a little bit of it. I want to enjoy a bit, but then I leave and go watch something else. I don't need to watch the entire set of everybody. Because that's just more just being around it so much, that's just more my vibe sometimes. Than
I see so much music too. It's just, for me, it's just sometimes I still get that FOMO. Did you end up at any pop-up shows the day one of When We Were Young, canceled, chaos, and then the Rejects and all these bands are just popping up at these little areas?
As soon as I saw those popping up, I was like, that is going to be a shit show. I want nothing to do with it. It's great that they did it, and good for, the fans who got to see those things. But I was just I went and hung out with some friends, and and was like, I'm not stressing any of this. Yeah. Luckily, I knew I was going the next day too, so I wasn't as bummed as, I felt so bad for people that traveled there and, didn't get to see it and then get to watch everyone else seeing it the next day.
But their model is the same show each day, right?
Yeah, it's a one-day festival that they do 3 times.
And so who's doing that now over weekends? It's not Coachella.
Coachella does the same thing 2 weekends in a row. ACL does the same weekend.
Yeah, so that's a new trend to be like, hey, if you can't go this day, maybe go that day and get more people.
Yeah.
I like it, but I don't know if I'm going to, if you need a 2-day, but then you're like, I'm there, especially as you're traveling to it, might as well. Cause now you can get to see, you don't have to, whoever you missed here, you can go see there. The lineup next year is incredible. I hope to get out there, but you see some festivals doing that more often, or more along different weekends to expand the amount of people. Do you like that? Do you think if I'm going to set it up for 2 weekends, should I have some different festival acts?
I I mean, it makes sense for some of those. I mean, Coachella they could do like 6 weekends of that and it'd be fine. So, I mean, I think it makes sense for those few A-list ones that they know they've got the demand and they can sell the tickets. It makes a lot of sense. And, you know, for when we were young, it made a lot of sense. And, instead of trying to find two headliners, you just pay the same headliner 2 days in a row, and it all works. So, I think the more the trend though is trying to make these festivals unique and different. And there's so many, the festival market is so saturated that like trying to do the big multi-day genre, Lollapalooza that's not Lollapalooza. I mean, obviously Lollapalooza is its own thing and its own brand, but like trying to build that kind of festival from scratch just doesn't work anymore. There's too many like that trying to grab the A-list headliners and 100 bands over a weekend. I think it's why some of the bigger festivals are the ones that are struggling and the smaller ones aren't, is the smaller ones are, once they have a real strong identity, so you think a Pitchfork Festival or a When We Were Young or a Punk Rock Bowling or, Psycho Las Vegas, if you like stoner metal, I think those festivals are doing well because they have a real soul and personality. They're not like every other festival. And there's a, a lot of festivals that don't have a lot of personality. They have the lineup, they just don't have something to make them
No,
unique.
I think that's the trend, and we're big supporters of the Four Chord Music Festival in Pittsburgh. Our friend Rishi, they got like wrestling exhibition there and skateboarding, great music too, but some other stuff. Brent is making a joke; he's not a music festival guy. He likes it with rides. We had John D'Esposito of the Bamboozle Fest, who's bringing it back next year, which was Warped Tour before Warped Tour almost, or not before it, but along the lines. And they're going to have amusement rides at the show. So it's like, come, bring people there. The music's going to be good, but there's also something else there, which I think gives it some personality. I know there's Ostrich Fest down over by you. I saw that. They have some great music there. And then it's like, it's not necessarily a music festival, but it's a great festival with some good music. I think either way, have a good music festival with, some other good entertainment.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go in a lot of different directions. Festivals mixing all sorts of things, either with podcasts or comedy or being very genre specific or location specific, or figuring out that what makes your festival unique is really hard, and trying to figure something to create it as a brand, I think is really hard right now. It's really easy to go out and grab Blink-182 or My Chemical Romance or or a Harry Styles and sort of cement a big lineup, but making that unique is a lot more challenging. And you see that the C3s of the world or the Golden Voices that are really, really good at that, and really good at making it so it doesn't just feel, so it has a brand and a personality and isn't just that. But I think there are a lot of festivals struggling because it doesn't have a soul.
I want to talk about NIVA right now, and it comes to mind because the independent promoters, Four Chord actually had Blink booked for their festival, and then COVID happened, and then had them rebooked, and then Mark got cancer, and now Blink is just signed to Live Nation. So if you're not a Live Nation music festival, they won't be playing for you, and so there's some obstacles we talked about a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what NIVA's doing, the money that they raised, the legislation that they were trying to get, and why it's so important for someone like you, your festival, your venue, and why people should think it's a big deal.
Yeah, so during we founded the organization in 2020 as to saw the need for that, needed real pandemic relief for the businesses that we were the first to close and were the last to open, and still feeling the ripple effects of all things COVID. We're not really through it on the business side yet. And we lobbied and got passed the Save Our Stages Act, which was just over $16 billion for music venues, promoters, movie theaters, museums, performing arts like ballet and symphonies. It was the largest arts funding in U.S. history by a significant margin. And so that was all funds that came out in 21 to sort of backwards, but it really saved the industry. I mean, anytime I'm at an industry event, just the number of people that say that saved their business, and it definitely saved mine. I would not be in a position to be growing or investing in Zona without it. That's not directly where the money came from, but saving the business existing is because of that. The business wouldn't exist to do this if it wasn't for that fund. So that's what we did in there. And now we're kind of at a pivot point of, so much of the work we did though was trying to build this to be a permanent organization and be a voice for that and for independence. And, and so we're in the final stages of hiring a new executive director. Reverend Moose, who was our first ED, who helped found it, has gone back to his marketing firm, Marauder. He was always intended as, the first ED, not the permanent one. He always intended to go back. So we're working on that as the big, kind of in a holding pattern. But, we're looking at future legislation and, a lot of it's going to be local. The initial focus was federal relief. We knew the only place enough funds could come was the federal government. It was such a big problem. There was nowhere else. But in future,
how do you make sure that the right people get it? I mean, obviously there's a lot of people in need, but not that it goes to truly the small people independent.
I think that's one of the ones the most remarkable, and it's definitely been noticed in DC, is the criteria written into the law was very specific. It was very specific of who did and didn't qualify. Ours, really was about performance venues, and I sort of worked on the team of trying to define that. It's just very hard to define what the criteria was. And then when the applications came out, it was a hard application. It was not an easy grant, but it was very specific. And I think through our efforts of forcing through a number, supporting people in their process, I don't really know anyone that qualified that didn't get theirs eventually. Some were more painful process than others. And I don't really know of, we've looked at it extensively and don't really see any fraud in it. So you see all these reports of other programs, PPP or unemployment insurance, that were just rampant with fraud. And this process was so hard, there is no fraud in it. We've kind of looked at it, and there's a few sort of questionable ones, but most of the ones that are questionable are small entities that, they deserved aid too. But there wasn't a lot of fraud. I mean, I don't know of any real, there wasn't a lot of fraud because it was really specific, and it took a lot of work to get it that way. A lot of fighting to, when we were pushing, our big thing was we're glad to add anyone into the bill. We're just not willing to expand anyone into the bill, meaning, anyone coming in needed to add more money to the pot to cover them using the mechanism. So once there was a bill, the Save Our Stages Act, and this program, other people wanted to get in. So the movie theaters, they had been trying to push for something. So we used, Congress added them in, but they got added in. It went from a $10 billion bill without them to a $15 billion bill with them. And then same with the museums, got it added in. And we're clear, if this is the mechanism to give aid to more people, great, let's give aid to more people, but it needs to be added, not expanded, not diluting the pot.
Yeah. I want to show you what I got from NIVA. I was supporting. I always forget to bring this. So I bought the NIVA trading cards.
Oh, nice.
So this is unopened, and then I bought a couple of packs.
Awesome.
A couple of packs that I opened up myself, and it was a pretty cool little thing. So these all these great historic, iconic venues, got a little trading card, and got to raise some money and help support. So
yeah, that was one I was very bummed I didn't end up in. I didn't get a trading card of Rebel Lounge in that. But some of those like ones when we did a bunch of those kind of partnerships, and it was always clear that we didn't want to be selecting, so we sent I forget whoever did those trading cards. We sent them like, here's a list of all our venues. Let us know which ones you want, and they sort of came back with the ones they wanted, and we made sort of the intros and connections to make it all work. But it was very much.
Shout out to Fantasy Tour. That's the company's great people.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I didn't particularly work on that specific project during it, but and so they kind of selected the venues they wanted, and it was a cool project.
Yeah, it's great. Fundraising is hard. I think I really like the idea, for me especially, is if I can, buy this, even if it's a product that's a little bit overpriced, you get some value back to feel like, hey, I'm going to buy that. I'm still helping. I get something a little myself, and just instead of just throwing money, because I think there's a lot of simple ways that everyone does. There's also a lot of unique ways like this to go and raise, to raise money, which is not easy. It's not easy to do. There's so much. Music is such a huge part of my life, and all of this stuff, sports. But it's hard to say, is that more important than cancer study and homeless and all? We talk about this all the time when we have people. It's hard to get visibility, to get attention, and to collect money from people, and it's needed, very much needed.
Yeah, a lot of good causes, and a lot of. I mean, that was one of our problems in 2020. Was there's so many causes and so many people who needed help and aid, and it's a hard one to say me over that, and you don't want to necessarily be making us not that. You want to be making your positive case, not a negative case for anybody else.
Yeah. Music festivals, events, these are hard. They're not all the money making that everyone thinks it is, because there's just so much expense to make it good. And you learn and hopefully get to be more efficient and stuff. But you also see a lot of these smaller festivals get gobbled up by the big boys because they know how to do it. And, is that good? Is that bad? What's your feeling on that?
It is a really hard, complicated business. I mean, you're building a city for a day. You're having so many different vendors, and so much of it does come down to nailing the logistics, and it's a really hard, just on how much merchandise for the festival are you ordering? How much alcohol are you ordering? And you get one shot, when you're a venue and you're doing shows 3, 5, 7 nights a week, you kind of got the cadence of, okay, I know what this is. But when you're doing a festival, there's a lot more just unknowns that you just don't know. What are the last month's sales going to be? And so do you need this feature or not? How big the ADA deck is. I don't, that was one we were talking about the other day of like, you don't want it so big that you're taking up tons of space, but you want it big enough that for what you need. And, when you're done it a ton of times, you might have a better gauge.
It's also not a problem until someone says it's a problem. You might do it small, but it doesn't affect anyone.
I mean, how many people need the ADA deck? I don't know, so it's one that, it's important. We need it. We know we need it. We just don't know, just some of those, but there's just so many decisions like that where it just, I have a lot of respect for anyone who pulls a large event off well, because it is so many pieces, and you're relying on so many people to make something happen.
My feeling would be to go big and not to cut corners, because fans notice that stuff and it's about the experience and they come back. With that, you end up overspending, and then also sometimes it's hard to improve and get better, right? To go so big. So what can we do next year? That's a big problem too, right?
It's a hard balance of, it's easy in the abstract to say go big and deliver, and the other one, it's like, You don't want to be sitting thinking like, oh, I would have made money, but I've got X expense over there and X expense over there, and no one's doing any, they're not adding value. Um, it's a hard to balance in the abstract.
What's the biggest
So,
complaint that you anticipate getting?
oh, that's a good one. I mean, you're always going to have the complaints of, oh, this wasn't exactly in the order I wanted, or, oh, these two bands were against each other, or, there's going to be some level of, that you just can't avoid. Like people are just going to complain no matter what. So some of those complaints, it's easy to not stress too much because no matter what you do, you're going to,
can't avoid it.
Someone's going to not like that their favorite band's playing at 2 p.m. and then no one else they want to see until 5 or something. Someone's going to complain about that stuff no matter what. So there's some of that. I don't know. We're hoping to mitigate all the, we've seen a lot of events in this park, spending a lot of time trying to think of, it's how many entry lanes do you have? How many entrances? Like trying to eliminate as many of those friction points as possible. So hopefully people aren't complaining about any of them, but you never know,
It's going to happen. I think the good festivals take the valid complaints and they learn from it. Some of it was, look, we didn't know. Some of it you can tell they just don't care. It's a money grab, and sometimes that becomes obvious because some of the stuff that makes the experience better, it's expensive to get. You don't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden it's better. And I think fans know that. But at the end of the day, I think also, and not you for a first time, but there's events that people are just going to go. They're going to go, and it doesn't matter that, they're going to go. It's a great event. They're going to have good music, and so it doesn't matter.
And some of it is expectation setting or what is the audience expecting. And, I always kind of love Riot Fest does, they use the same banners every year, it's like literally you can tell it's been sitting in a box and, like they don't waste money on certain things that, other festivals might, but it's Riot Fest. It's punk rock. Like
they're funny. They're a good follow on social media.
Yeah, they're great. And it's like they've set the expectation. It's like, hey, we're going to put some good bands on stage in front of you. Shut up about the rest, and like they kind of have this, I love their back and forth. It's like, when are you releasing the lineup? Well, we were going to, but now that you asked, we're not going to, we're throwing it back.
Some funny stuff.
They managed to set the expectation and people, do it. And if you set the expectation too high of, hey, this is going to be a marvelous VIP experience, and then you don't deliver, you've set the expectations too high. So some of it's managing that of like, what do people expect? Like I went up to Treefort in Idaho this year, and what a neat little festival. But I mean, it's just sort of, there's something very small town, DIY, the whole aesthetics kind of DIY, it's definitely not, Cabanas at Coachella vibe. It's this DIY festival in Idaho, and everyone has a ton of pride in it. And some of the things that they do a little more DIY, no one cares because that's the vibe, and it's people get it, and they get that it's like, yeah, it's a cheap ticket in Idaho. It's not, it's not a destination vacation luxury experience, but they get away with it because people get the spirit of it.
Yeah, my friends went to country music. I think it was a new one in Jersey on the beach, and they oversold the VIP so much that it was too crowded. You couldn't sit there. There was no good viewing experience. So they had to give some refunds and give people regular, that people were in the regular.
Some of that's hard. Some of it, when you're building a venue from scratch, how many VIP can we sell for these areas that are going to have the right flow? Because it's not how many people can I fit in a square space.
Yeah.
It's how many people can I fit in that can get to the bathrooms and get to the bars and have a good viewing space. And it's until you do that a few times, especially if you're in a space that's not necessarily a known commodity, getting that right is really hard. It's like, it's easy to say, oh, they oversold it, but it's like, they may not have realized, until
friend talking again, he's not a music guy.
Oh,
Fire
those
Festival.
those two documentaries on Firefest came out in 19, the week of my 8123 festival, which
Oh, jeez.
and I was just like, that is all anyone in the industry is talking about is a failed festival. And I'm on site setting one up, and just like,
Yeah,
it was the biggest thing I had done to date. And both me and my partner, Tim, who owns 8123, who manages the main, and my partner on the festival, we're like, I can't watch it. I can't look at any of these headlines. I don't want to know. And then that was both of ours. Monday after a festival, we like stayed in, and it was like, I'm laying on the couch. I'm not working. Monday's my day off. And we both watched those Fire Festival documentaries and had to call
crazy.
each other.
Is and
It
then
was
and
just like,
then and then the
you know,
Woodstock one comes out, and you're like, this is a wild. It's a wild scene.
the Woodstock one, like, it's so funny how everyone sort of skips around the fact that, like, it's so much simpler than like everyone makes it. That those guys just didn't know what they booked, right?
And they
They
didn't
thought they
care
booked.
too. You didn't know, and then it's like you didn't care.
Yeah,
I think not that they didn't care about anything, but it wasn't the most important thing. And Brent wants to know if he's in jail. He actually just got released from jail. I think the intentions might have been good from the start of Fire, and then once it's not, you get
that
it's
guy was
what do you
always
do?
a that guy was always a scammer. I mean, he had
Yeah,
already had fraud things. Like, he got in over his head because he didn't care, and he was just trying to get rich. And there was no, he didn't want to create a great event. He wanted to get rich. And so, like, that one comes through. The Woodstock one, it's like, I think they thought they were booking Woodstock, but really they were booking a Linkin Park crowd show. Or I mean, it wasn't Linkin Park,
Limp Bizkit.
Korn and Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, but there's other
And-
festivals like that if they're run well elsewhere, it's
oh,
not a big deal to
they
have
did-
that kind of
oh, well, that's the one of their security choices. Didn't know the audience they were bringing, and they were
yeah.
making choices thinking the audience was one thing and the audience was another. And like, one thing I've learned a long time is, it's like, the tone you set at the start of the day is the tone you're going to have throughout the day. And they did not set the tone with security. When you've got those crowds, you've got to set the tone right. They didn't do that because they didn't understand the audience. And it's so much more just fundamental. They didn't understand what they were booking. I've always been a big believer in book what you know. Has always been my guiding one. And over the years, what I know has expanded greatly from the high school bands I was booking 20 years ago. But they didn't know what they were booking. And they thought, they put Woodstock on the poster, they're going to have a Woodstock audience, but they sold tickets to Limp Bizkit show, and they got Limp Bizkit fans. And
Yeah.
I do a lot of metal. I do a lot of punk rock and metal, and how you staff for a metal show is very different than how you staff for a Bleachers show. The instructions on security is very different. And
Well, I've been at
what
some
you know.
shows lately where there's mosh pits, and they're just the nicest. The second someone falls, it stops and you lift them
Oh,
up. And it depends on the band. Sometimes the band, if they see stuff going on, they'll stop. So there's just so many different
um,
factors that could have maybe avoided all of it, and just all
yeah.
together was like,
And I always like, I always try and hire hardcore metal kids to work the pit. Like, when you have security that knows that crowd and knows it, you don't have problems, but you need the right team on it. And when we book hardcore stuff, I always try and get a couple security guards that are hardcore kids that know it. And it's hard. And you know, um it you just got to know what you're doing. And if you're set up for it, it's fine. You know, but you just got to know what you're booking.
you got to have the right people around. You have a lot of experience. You mentioned Tim. He's 8123, said Summer Festival, a lot of good experience. Talked to
Yep.
Tim before. Having the right people to know it's the best way to go no matter what you're doing. The people who know. And so I think you guys are heading in the right direction. What's the best music festival you've ever been to,
Oh, that's a tough question.
or your favorite?
Um,
Like, do you have one that sticks out? Like, man, this was it.
I don't have one. I went to Outside Lands this year for the first time, and that is just such a great setting for a festival. Like, you feel like you're in the woods and you're in the center of San Francisco. So, like, location, that one was great. I always enjoy Riot Fest is a lot. Maybe just more that's the aesthetic of. There's more bands at Riot Fest that I personally like and work with than most other festivals, so that's always a good one. I was really impressed with When We Were Young this weekend, just to be the most top of mind. Like they did a great job. I mean, the day that happened, they did a great job on. Unfortunately, they didn't get to have their whole weekend. Um, Favorite festival that I used to always love punk rock bowling. That was a fun one. That's always a neat one.
If you have
I
a
don't know.
3-day festival and you can get whoever you want to play, who's headlining those 3 days?
That's a
You can
tough
get
question.
anyone you want.
It depends on what you're. I mean, that's the one of what's the
It's
vision
your
of the
festival. You're
festival.
putting your fix on it. It could be anything you want.
Seems like a very generic answer, but if I could book anyone, probably the Foo Fighters. Just that's one I'm personally a huge fan of. Seems like they last year headlined almost every major festival,
Yeah, they
so
were great.
not the most unique answer, but I just love the Foo Fighters.
That's one
They
day.
played
You got a 3-day festival. What are other 2 days?
yeah, that's a good one. I don't know.
It's hard to
Uh,
think when someone says you
I
can get whatever you want, right? Because you just know it's
yeah. I also like the smaller boutique festivals, the ones that are not driven by the massive headliners. So, like,
yeah.
you know, Portugal Band and Bleachers were two of the first artists I reached out to on this festival, and they're two of our confirmed headliners. So I kind of got my first. Then we uh, added Beach House, who I was so incredibly stoked to get.
I
When
was bummed when Fun stopped.
oh yeah,
Broke up, but now Bleachers, I've come. Jack from the band Fun is now part of Bleachers, and I think they do a great job. Some real fun music.
yeah. And then I did a bunch of shows with him way earlier before Fun when he used to be in a band called Steel Train.
Mm.
That was on Drive Through, and they were kind of jammy indie rock band, and did a number of shows with them. They were great. They did a ton with the Format, who turned into Fun. So known those guys a long time.
Yeah, I saw Fun and Bruce Springsteen play at the Final Four. That was one of my top 5 all time
Oh wow,
concerts. Just playing together. It was a great show, free show too, with the Final Four, and it was raining a little bit, and just that's
yeah. I was
I'm
listening
I have
to
such a wide range. So for me, I do enjoy the festivals that have that wide range of stuff.
that's the balance. That's the hard balance of how do you make it niche enough or coherent enough that it's got a coherent vision and broad enough that it's interesting and not boring, and
Yeah.
like I think when you're doing the big giant multi-day festival, the Lollapalooza or the Governor's Ball or those, you have so many slots that you can go in a lot of directions and you can have a lot on there, because you can make 20 band, you can have 20 hip hop bands, 20 rock bands, 20 hipster bands, 20 pop bands, and there's a good track for everybody. But when you're a smaller festival, getting that balance of enough that's interesting, but also coherent enough that it appeals to enough people. Because what doesn't work is when you have that festival that's got like 10 bands and it's 10 different genres, and you go like, well, if I like that one hip hop act, but there's no one else I want to watch, and I like that one metal act, but there's no one else. If I like that metal band, there's no one else I would want to watch. And like when you only have a few bands on a smaller festival, you kind of have to have it coherent so that they like build on each other. When you've got the 100 band, 300 bands over a weekend, you can book enough of each little subgenre to have a lot of diversity in it.
But it's
And
still
so
tough
getting
at the top, the bigger ones. Like it's hit or miss. You could have a huge star, and they could have a huge following, but is that following going to be able to go in that area and want to go to see them in a festival setting too? So it's hard to especially when you're starting out. At some point, the bigger festivals, people are going to go. It almost doesn't matter what the lineup is, and you almost sort of aim to be like, it's going to be a good lineup, but it's not as important.
Yeah, well, that's the handful of A-list festivals that are really a brand where people really know. I've been going to Lollapalooza for a decade, and I trust that I know their vision. I love this festival, and I'm going to go. Or a Coachella or some of those other, the outside lands of the world where you're going to give them a lot of faith in that you trust whatever's under their lineup.
And they're
That's hard
selling
to get
tickets
to, like,
for a lineup too.
I mean, that's hard to get, like, the few festivals that can transcend to that point.
Yeah.
Like, that's where the magic is, when, most festivals can't get to that point, where people really just trust, the way you trust a Coachella, or you trust a Primavera Sound, or you trust some of these festivals. That's hard.
You got to start somewhere.
Makes
Year
you-
one, Arizona
Yeah.
Fest, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
What's you do it on your own. This is your vision. What excites you the most about that? What one thing can people come away with or feel when they're there that's say, hey, this was my vision?
That's a good question. I love seeing that people are reacting to some of the smaller bands on the bill, when we see that on some of the ones that we just really believe in. No one was really submitted to us on this. No one was, most of the small bands on this are ones we work with a lot. So, like, a big part of the goal is that discovery and a vehicle and a platform for the bands we work with. And so seeing people freaking out about artists that are, freaking out about The Garden or The Regrets or Upsall or some of these ones that are the bottom, and feels very vindicating to me.
All these bands talk about the story of where they're playing at the bottom of the festival lineup or in a small bar in front of nobody. So these bands got to start somewhere to give them a platform and bring them to a broader mass. Exciting stuff for them and for you. We're going to let you out of the Wolff Den with the same question everybody gets. You can spend a day with anyone in the world. They have to be alive and you can't be related to them. Who would you choose and what would you guys do?
Oh, man. That is such a good question. I wish I had thought about that.
My friend wants to do Fishing with George W., but he won't come on. It's only for the guests. We had our 250th episode coming up on Thursday. 247 answers here. We've had some wild ones. We've had some ones that were repeated. But who would you like to? And someone you've never met, someone that you probably don't have access to yet.
That is a really
What's the first? What comes to
question.
mind? If you're on Family Feud and the buzzer's coming in, what are you saying before the buzzer hits us?
I think Springsteen would be high on the list of someone that talk to him about anything other than music. Yeah, Travel New Jersey with Springsteen would be a good one. Would be high on the list. Like, I don't think there's a lot of musicians I'd put on that list, but probably be maybe a Malcolm Gladwell would be fascinating to talk to for the day. Go do something trivial.
What would you like to do with Bruce if we're not doing music? What do you think would be fun to do with Bruce?
Oh, I don't know. Just go to a bar in New Jersey. Go to a dive bar in New Jersey.
The Stone Pony to hang out. He shows up at the Stone Pony once in a while. Just shows up. It's a true New Jersey icon. I'm from New Jersey.
Nice.
Big fan of Bruce. Check out the website, Psyko Steve. The spelling is a little bit off. Zona Music Fest, NIVAassociation.org. All great companies, organizations, great music. Looking forward to hearing the success of Zona Music Fest and see what comes next. And hope to see you at a music festival sometime soon. We got our 250th episode on Thursday night, a special episode. Tune in. We got another one tomorrow. This was 248. We got 249. And we'll see you soon. Have a great night.
And congrats on 250.